So, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this session. It's now turning 2 o'clock here in the United Kingdom, 3 o'clock mainland Europe, and whatever time zones we have around the world. Welcome to the session from Learning Tree on leading virtually. My name is Rahul Dogra. Rahul, as you wish. I'm a British citizen born and raised here in the United Kingdom. And I've been operating in a virtual world for 20 plus years. I started life out, I run a software company, and I started life out working with my teams in America, in Chicago, and 2 teams in India. And we had in those days a 14.4K modem, a telephone that we were told not to use, and yet we were asked to collaborate and work with people in a virtual setting. Now, COVID has all of a sudden brought virtual working to a highlight. And you see, the thing is, if you look at all the books behind me, these are all my books for my studies, my MBAs, etc. All of these books talk about management, motivation, leadership, but from a co-located instance. They don't really talk about a virtual, operating environment. As soon as we operate in a virtual environment, things are different. And so we need to think about how do we go about leading in that virtual environment. If you look at, the COVID situation and with many people, being operating from home, the one thing that struck me is how many people thought they couldn't work from home, but now have found some mechanisms to do so. But also it gives us some challenges from a virtual point of view, from a leader's point of view. We're still going to get the results, but now we're working with people where things take longer in terms of the communications, and how we try and get things done in a virtual environment is very different than when we're in the office. So you see, the term itself, leading virtually, we used to call it leading virtual teams, leading in a virtual and remote setting. Now, the word remote itself, I think, is quite redundant. I don't want, my team members to be remote from me. I want them to be as if they are, in the next room. So for those of you who are separated by great distances, you could be, located next door to me. But if we're still using that technology, we're still operating in a virtual setting. So today, we're now calling it leading virtually, and that term is sort of ubiquitous and is known by everybody. But I think, you see, the things, what's going to happen in the future is that the term virtually is going to be gotten rid of altogether. I have 2 boys. I have an 18-year-old at university, and I have a 15-year-old doing their studies. For them, how do they operate? My 18-year-old, university is now finished. A lot of lessons are done online. The 15-year-old's playing on the Xbox, playing with friends all over the world. For them, operating in a virtual environment is their norm. And I think in the future, we're simply going to call it just leading, leading our team. But things are slightly different. We have to take the account of all the differences, the risks associated with operating in a virtual environment. As you can see here, things have changed slightly hair-wise, but it's the same realm. I've been working, I did my MBA, I got a master's in quality management, and I've got a first degree in engineering. I've been operating in a virtual environment for many, many years, and I've been advising companies, federal governments, I've advised the US various departments on how to operate in a virtual environment. I help global teams in how to work in a virtual setting, and I hope I can share some of those experiences with you. So what do we mean by virtual working, first of all? Virtual working simply means people are working together to try and get some end result, but they're geographically dispersed. Okay, so rather than relying on that richness of face-to-face, they're relying on some form of mediated communications. And those mediated communications, we'll put them into 3 buckets. We'll call them, first of all, video conferencing, audio conferencing, and computer mediated. Now, geographically dispersed. I was in the US, and someone said to me, "So Raul, tell me, how can I run my team? I'm here in Houston. I'm running a team in China. What can I do about the time zones?" Not an awful lot. Either someone has to get up very early in the morning, or someone has to stay very late at night. Time zones are time zones. And often when we think of global teams, we do think of these very large distances. But equally, as I say, you may be operating in a building where you're on the left-hand side and people on the right-hand side, and they're separated by a few hundred meters. If all they do is communicate by email or picking up the phone, they're now operating virtually. Where it starts getting complex is when people are now in a different time zone. It's always someone's lunchtime, someone's dinner time. When we're operating where English maybe is the root operating language of the organization, but it's not the first, the mother tongue. for a lot of individuals. When you're separated by differences organizationally, you may be in a large organization, global organization. The way you do things in London may be very different from the way things are done in Hong Kong. So those start to become the nuances of virtual working. So we're separated by distance, but it's all down to technology in terms of how we work. Now, if the internet goes down right now, that's it. We can't communicate anymore. And just using Zoom as, it's been very popularized over the last 10, 12 weeks, it's not enough in a virtual environment. We have to carefully consider what tools we're using in a virtual setting. So there's 3 sets of tools. I would still say today, in the 21st century, that virtual working, face-to-face is the best form of working that we can possibly do. Now, you can see at the top of the screen, there's a person in white with that arm raised like this, probably mirrored over here. If you agree with that, just raise your hands. That the best form of working is still face-to-face. And I don't think that's just a generational thing. I think there's a richness in that communication that we do. Of course, things are going to change. Those quick trips from London to New York that were being done, I don't think they're going to be done anymore. I think we're going to start using, virtual technologies and virtual ways of operating. So there's 3 types of tools we can use for our communications. The first one is video conferencing. Now, if face-to-face, I think is the best form of communication, I'm going to give that a 4 in terms of, the richness, the effectiveness of it all, etc. If face-to-face is 4, video conferencing is a 3. Now, clearly, you can see my face, you can see I'm smiling. That's not the same as face-to-face, but at least you can get an image over there. If I ask a question, say, is today Tuesday? You're even going to press the button, say, yes, it is, or you're going to type in the chat and say, yes, it is. It's going to take longer in terms of that feedback. If you can see someone, it's obviously going to be richer than not seeing them. But video conferencing is not quite the same as face-to-face, despite all the enhancements in technologies, etc. So video conferencing is a 3. Audio conferencing is a 2. So that's telephone. Whether it's a mobile or voice over internet, that's a telephone. You're missing a large element of that visual representation. And then you have computer mediated. It's not as rich, it's not as effective as a face-to-face communication. Yes, it's still important, particularly when English is not perhaps the main operating language of the organization, where you need written documentation, etc. But the point is, we need to think very carefully about what tools we're using in order to collaborate and communicate. I'm going to ask the following question. Before COVID, not after, not during COVID, before COVID, how many of you use video on a regular basis? Just raise your hands. A number of you. Now, from a lot of the discussions I've been having with my companies I've been working with, etc., there was a large tranche of people who didn't use video for whatever reason. I haven't done my hair, the internet's bad, whatever reasons there are over there. But they were trying to operate at the lower end of the scale. So they were operating at that 2 and that 1 area, the audio conferencing and the computer mediated. Why? Because maybe it's easy to use and there's less hurdles to get through, etc. But here you are trying to undertake complex work with people around the world using tools that aren't as rich as they could be from using virtual tools. So virtual working is here to stay, and I think one end results of COVID-19 is more and more people are going to be working from home for the foreseeable future, at least. So operating in a virtual environment is going to be very important from a worker's point of view, but from a leader's point of view, how do we still get results? How do we coordinate the work? How do we exchange knowledge? How do we onboard new team members? We're still in the business of getting the results, but we need to think in a slightly different way in a virtual kind of context. So you see, from my parents' generation, and for a lot of our parents' generation, how did we get work done? Here was a task. You're in London, you're in New York, you're in Hong Kong, you're in Lagos. Do you know what? Let's all come to the task. Okay, that's how we got things done. Now we can say the tasks are here, but we have the best talent in New Zealand, the best person in Singapore, the best person in Vienna. Wherever the people are, let's take it to them. Now that's fine so long as we have an infrastructure allow it. But from a leader's point of view, what's really important is that we can't get involved in this sort of command and control. We can't there sit there at the center and say, John, you do this, Mary, do this, now tell me when you've done it. We just don't have the time to get this done. What we need to do is create what I call the spider web of communication, where people are proactively communicating to each other. I would suggest in a virtual environment, you need more, not less communications. Please raise your hands if you've had that experience as well. You need more, not less communication. I think it's a universal agreement over there. But it's not about physically more communication. It's not about me sending 500 emails a day to an individual. It's about the quality of the communication that we do. So there's a big emphasis on communicating in that virtual environment. And people who are smart in virtual leadership, they create this proactive sort of spider web of communication where people are proactively, checking in. They're having this essence of a team. So virtual working, I think, is here to stay, obviously, but we're going to do more and more of it. And you see, what's interesting in that virtual environment is we are now going to be operating in an environment where more of us are going to be operating virtually. So you see, where the challenges start coming is, here we are in a virtual team, and I had 4 team members that I used to work with together in the office. I know all of them. We had a beer together and, we spent time together, etc. So here I am as a leader. I know these individuals. We've worked together in the office. Now we're working virtually. We're separated. Well, that's fine because I know something about them. But what happens when I hire new people? And I've got these 2 new people who've joined the team. And first of all, I've got to get to know them, but then the others have got to get to know them. Now, it's a lot easier being in the office together, finding out about each other, but what happens when we're separated from each other? These are going to be some of the challenges we face in the virtual setting. In a virtual environment, relationships and building communications are absolutely crucial to what we do. Communications. We've got great tools around us, but are we using them in the right way? One of the conclusions that I've come up with in terms of looking at what's happening around us is that if you're not digitally smart, you're going to really be in trouble in a virtual environment. And what I mean by digitally smart is, are you okay with setting up your camera and using Microsoft Teams and then going into a bit of Zoom and doing whatever tools are available around you? For some people, it's second nature. For others, it's a struggle. Some people can barely use simple technology. So there's almost like a differentiator involved in the tools themselves. But it's not just being aware of Microsoft Teams, it's how do you use it? What benefits are you getting from it? How are we creating that collaboration over there? So we've got to think about the tools that are available to us and think about how we use them in a collaborative way. You see, we're using communications for a number of purposes. The first part of communications is the word, communications itself. If you think, does it actually mean? It means to connect. We need to connect with each other. How do we go about creating that sense of connection? We need to do more connection, not less connection from there. But we're also communicating in order for us to enable information to be sent between us and for us to collaborate. Now, you see, collaboration is shaped by many factors. The fact that we are diverse. I'm an engineer, you're, come from media, you come from this country, that country, you're this age, that age. This is all part of that diversity over there. And that can, impede our ability to collaborate because we don't know what skills and capabilities each of us have. But collaborating now in a virtual environment is going to become very difficult. And you see, where the issue arises here is, one of the customers I was working with recently, there are 10,000 odd people globally. Now that sounds really impressive. 10,000 people, offices all across the world, etc. But the reality is they've got a very big office in London, a decent size in Washington, and then you go around the world, and then you find these little pockets. The office in Adelaide in Australia is 30 people. The office in Thailand is 40 people. So now, all of a sudden, out of 10,000 people in the organization, the reality is there's only 30 people in your country office. How do you tap into that knowledge wherever it exists, across the world? That becomes a crucial issue for us, and that's what's going to impede perhaps our collaboration. We also need to think about team relationships. We need to think, how do we form those? So we're human beings. We need to be around other people. Every single day I've been going running. You can probably see it in me right now. But I go running and I do a 5-kilometer run. But the reality is I stop every 1 kilometer, 2 kilometers, I bump into a friend. And that 30-minute run ends up being an hour, hour and a half, because I'm talking to people and catching up with people, etc. But that's a great thing, because we're human beings, we need to be around people. And now all of a sudden, when we're separated from people, where do we feel that sort of social void, that sense of belonging with each other? So the issue will then become, maybe in this 10,000 person organization. But right now, when you're sat here, without the branding of that office, without being in that lovely area where the nice food restaurants are and the coffee shops are, when you're sat in your house, looking at your monitor with your camera on, etc., you don't have that sense of, I'm part of a 10,000 person organization. It can be quite lonely for some individuals. So these become some of the challenges that we face in a leadership perspective, when we're operating virtually. So from a leader, there's 3 things, that we need to focus on. We need to think about, where do we put our energies and attentions to get the results? We're in the business of getting results. It's all about getting the tasks done. But for us to get the tasks done, we need to focus on the relationships and the communications. And I'll talk about that in a minute. We also need to think about the team. What does the team need to be successful? Now, the first thing the team needs is trust. We need an environment of trust. If we don't have trust within that team, then that team is not going to really be performing. Can I ask a question? How many of you have come across a person called Patrick Lencioni? And he's written a book called The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. Anyone raise their hands if they come across that book? A number of you have. Well, I'm going to give you a blog to take a look at. It's a really interesting piece of work. It says, why are teams dysfunctional? If you can understand what makes a team dysfunctional, if you reverse that, you now make a functional team. And at the base of the model is trust. We need a team that has trust. If we go back to the situation I talked about earlier, here's Raul and 4 others. We've all worked together. We had a beer together. We've developed trust. But now a new person joins that team. Where is the trust from there? In a virtual setting, they often talk about swift trust. We've got to build that trust pretty quickly. We need to focus on it because it won't happen by chance. But as individuals within the team, can we now be operating with 20 people in our team? Think about it as a leader's point of view, delegating information, doing the communication, coordinating the work. Where are you going to find the hours, in a working week to work with all, large team size? So maybe we need to factor in and think proactively around, what that team size is. I've always thought 7 is a very important number when it comes to team size. And even, with 7 people, just checking in on people, working out what each person is doing, that becomes, an important factor for us to consider over there. But from the team's point of view, how do we make sure they have a sense of purpose, a sense of direction? Our job there is to make sure that they're all going in the right direction. As a team, think about our team as one big arrow, okay? Now, in that arrow, we've got all these team members. Now, we hope all the team members are within the arrow. What we don't want is the one person going in the wrong direction. Then that's going to bring the team down. So they need to understand what the big picture of what we're trying to do, where we're going in our direction. Don't just assume that people will know. We also need to think about who's doing what, where, and when. What are those defined roles and responsibilities? Even something as mechanical as RACI. Some of you will come across it if you're from a project management background. Who's responsible, who's accountable, who do we need to consult, who do we need to inform? It's just knowing who does what in whichever context. I had a mail this morning from a customer, and CC'd as 10 or 15 people. I have no clue who those 10, 15 people are. How important or not are they in relation to our team? You see, we've got to think about, moving forward from COVID-19. a lot of the people that you're working with now are people that you know. But if this situation carries on, and even when COVID-19 ends, we are going to be operating more and more virtually. We may well be working with people that will never get the opportunity, to meet for the foreseeable future. But we still need to operate as a team. We still need to get things done. So as an individual, you're away from the center. You don't have that luxury of getting together. There was a large global team worked with a few weeks ago. Large global team, very successful, growing rapidly, which sounds fantastic, but it is a problem. Why? Because you've got all these people who are joining at a very fast pace, but nobody knows each other. So how do you overcome that? Well, you rely on the annual conference that they hold once a year, which is supposed to be being done in the United States this year. That's now cancelled. So now when you don't have that opportunity to meet in a conference setting, how are you going to build those relationships between each other? Good, solid teams have relationships. They build and then maintain those relationships. It's also about understanding the risks associated with operating in a virtual setting. Conventional thinking says, if this project is very high risk, please don't send it to various team members, regardless of where they are. We don't have that luxury anymore. There's a risk associated with delays, risk associated with people misunderstanding, risk associated perhaps with English, etc., etc. So we need to be very mindful of those risks. If you're operating in the UK and it's now 20 past 2 in the UK, if I'm working with colleagues in Romania and I say this is very, important, I need to get this done as soon as possible, what I've got to remember is it's 4:30 in Romania. People are now thinking about going home. They're not going to have that same sense of urgency as you have over there. That increases a risk for all of us. So we need to identify what those risks are, as we would in any project, and then mitigate those risks as well. And for me, what really sort of sums up the issues that we have in virtual working is if you have this sort of metaphor of an iceberg, and you think about how we get work done. The way we get work done is, if you think about, just imagine we were in a boat. We're all in this boat together. What do we see? We see this iceberg, which is floating in the water. And what we see is this huge, chunk of ice, which is all about the tasks. The tasks are the visible bits. That's why we are hired, to get results. But what we don't see in order to get the results are two things. The first one is the relationships. We need to build relationships. Now, there's two elements with relationships. The first one is we build relationships with team members, then we go about maintaining those relationships. At the end of the day, we're human beings. You think on a daily basis, when we used to go into the office, the first thing that we would do is maybe turn on our machine and go to the coffee machine. You go to the coffee machine, you bump into a colleague. What sort of conversations would you have? How are you? Did you see X Factor? Did you see the football? How are the kids? By the way, there's a problem with this project. Just wanted you to get to know about it. We are human beings and we need to build those relationships with each other. But then within a team, a high functional team is one that maintains those relationships. It maintains the links between the individuals over there. And obviously, the leader is almost like the puppet maker. It's the catalyzer of that team there. So we need to put a lot of focus on maintaining that strength of unity within the team. One virtual team that I was working with recently, what they would do is a daily meeting, a daily, they call it a stand-up meeting, but they call it a huddle. So it was just a virtual meeting that was done within the team every single day. Now, just raise your hands if you're doing that within your teams. I think it's absolutely vital. Now, some people may see it as a waste of time. I don't at all. What it allows us to do is create a sense of connection with each other. Now, in fact, this team had two huddles a day. The first one was the morning, which was simply wellness. Are you okay? And they had one in the afternoon, which was focused on the tasks. You see, I told you about my running. I bumped into a program director that I know, and he was telling me about hiring an individual, a new business analyst who joined his team. And he was telling me about the whole nuances of interviewing him by video, etc. over there. I said, well, that's great, you've hired this person, but how do you now onboard that person with the rest of the team? That person may be great, may have all sorts of skills and knowledges and background, but if Raoul doesn't know about it, how can I take advantage of it? And he understood that point there, because we need to build those relationships between the team members. We then need to facilitate the communications. Communication doesn't happen by chance. The number one issue you face when you go to most organizations is communications. And I often ask, what do you mean by that? Do you not know how to use the telephone? What does it mean? It's about collaboration. It's about connecting within the team. It's about using the tools in the right way. We need to do more, not less communication. We need to connect with the team as often as we possibly can. And when we invest in the relationship of the communications, then we get the work done. And to get the work done, it's all about the ground rules. The ground rules are how we would operate. If you go to an office, if you go on board an airline, wherever you go in these, whatever it might be, there are ground rules. This is how we'd like you to operate. These are the clothes we'd like you to wear. This is the time we'd like you to come in. If those ground rules are there when we're face-to-face, they're also important when we're virtual. Those ground rules might be around how we collaborate, how we deal with risk, etc. And the number one reason that I've come across why teams fail in a virtual setting is in their sort of pursuit of getting the work done, there was very little investment in building those relationships. There was very little investment in getting the communications right. All the focus was on getting the work done, and because they didn't invest in the below the waterline, they didn't get the advantages above the waterline. Now, this is where it gets very interesting, because I work with a lot of global teams. And so if you look at it from a global perspective, if you are working, for example, I was in Uganda at the start of the year, working with a team over there. Now, in Uganda, it'd be fair to say that relationships are very important. You build the relationships first, you get the work done second. Whereas in America, it will be very much, let's get the work done first and the relationships we form by just working together. This is where we get these differences in a global kind of context. And these become the challenges from a virtual point of view. How much emphasis are you placing on building those relationships and then maintaining them? How have you looked and reflected on how are we communicating, the quality of the communicating? I was with a team in Switzerland, and the director of finance hated I talked about Microsoft Skype. Hated Microsoft Skype. Absolutely went off on one. Just hated it. I asked him why. He said, when I have Microsoft Skype on, I'm constantly interrupted. And I said, okay. But you do realize you have a do not disturb. He said, really? I didn't realize this. And you see, in this gentleman's ignorance, what he had done was his entire finance team, he had told them specifically not to use that tool. So that lack of digital smart meant the teams were not operating in an effective kind of manner. So think about your teams. Think about how we're building and maintaining those relationships. Think about what you're going to do when new team members join that team. How do they have that sense of we're a team? How do we create that trust? How are we communicating? What is the quality of our communication? How could we improve? If you're not digitally smart, what can you do to become digitally smart? Because that's going to be the new world order. And does your team have those ground rules? Does it know what it's trying to do and achieve in a virtual setting? From a leadership point of view, we recognize the minute that we're separated, we are now, when we increase that distance, what happens is that frequency of communication starts falling. So basically, if we were together, there'll be a lot of communication. There's a lot of what they call osmotic communication, communication by just being present. Now, a lot of us are in, these meetings where it's Teams or Zoom or whatever, and it's endless back-to-back meetings. But ask yourself the following: how effective are those meetings? Do we need ground rules for those meetings themselves? From a virtual point of view, from a leadership point of view, we need to be very clear about what the objective is. Teams that operate well in the virtual setting, they publish this information. They make sure the team is on board with this information. So they know where we're going as a team. Everyone knows who is doing what, where, and when. You see, if you take a look at process theory, if there's 4 people within the team, and out of the 4 people, 3 of them are operating at 100%, but this individual is operating at 80%. All that process theory says is because of that 80%, everyone else within that team now falls because they were not operating at the optimum amount. So people need to know who's doing what, where, and when. When Raoul creates an output and I send it to Mary, Mary has to do something with it and then send it to John. You're part of a bigger system. But if all you see is what you're doing, you're not getting access to the bigger type of thing that we're doing there. How do we go about fixing results? There's a risk when you're separated from each other. We need mechanisms for dealing with correction of errors and conflict that may or may not arise over there. But when we're together, it's a rich opportunity. And I think what will happen moving forwards is you may not get the luxury of being with your team for a long, long period of time, even when people are allowed to go back in the office. Because of social distancing, etc., you may have only 3 or 4 of your team members on a particular day. So actually having everyone together, when we say team, it's going to be a hybrid format. Some people are going to be together in the office, some people are going to be virtual from each other. When we're together, it's rich. As soon as we're separated, it becomes, we start introducing risk. We need more, not less communications, within that setting there. So we need to spend more time in our communicating. And our role in communication, we want to create this spider web over there. We don't want to have that command and control type nature around, the way we operate, because that sort of suggests there's a lack of trust within the team. A team that is highly effective, what it does is, from my point of view, I think the most effective form of management that exists is the following. It's MBWA. MBWA is management by walking about. Okay? That's what MBWA is. Management by walking about. What it says is, as a manager, you don't say to people, please, if you have an issue, come and see me. Okay? My door is always open. Because the reality is, people, if they have a problem, they will just stay, where they are. Maybe they're new, they don't want to interrupt you. I'll try and sort it out on my own. What MBWA says is, what we actually do is, rather than say, you come to me, you go out, and see your team. So maybe, if we were in the office together, when a meeting ends, you walk back, to your office, and on the way back, you stop, and talk to a few people. That's MBWA. That's management by walking about. And the reason why it's very powerful is, as a manager, you always want to deal with problems when they're little. You want to deal with a problem when it's little. Why? It takes less resources. The impact of that problem is much smaller. But you see, if here's Raoul, who's got this small problem, and, I don't come and see the leader, all that'll happen is that problem will get bigger and bigger and bigger. And by the time it gets huge, it'll eventually come to Raoul and say, here, Raoul, deal with this. Now, all of a sudden, all sorts of trouble will occur as a result. As a leader, what's really important is we need to do VMBWA, Virtual Management by Walking About. Just do me a raise of hands if you're doing that on a regular basis. And that's great if you're doing that. You see, what you've got to recognize is it takes time. It takes time to do virtual MBWA. Every single phone call, it disrupts the day. So you need to build that into your diary, because I would challenge you, just take a look over the next week or so. How much time? Just make a little spreadsheet and say, how much time am I spending doing VMBWA? It might be as high as 10%, 20%, 30%, all depends on the nature of your team. And there's barriers involved there. Now imagine you've got a new person, you're in the UK, you've got a senior person in your team, and you've hired them, and they're in China. They may need a lot of your support in a coaching capacity in the very beginning, just to get them up to speed. But the time zones and the language means, you're not spending that time doing VMBWA. What's the risk now associated with that? So, VMWA becomes very important because of our communications. And this process in Agile, just raise your hands if you're familiar with Agile and Scrum meetings. Become very, very popular, this whole thing of Scrum. So there's a thing called Scrum. We won't go into Agile itself, But Scrum is basically a daily meeting where people stand up. The whole point there is you don't get relaxed and sit down, but you have this daily Scrum meeting. And the point of those Scrum meetings is transparency. Who's doing what, where, and when. Part of that is we're huddled together. We have a sense of teamwork. And so in the virtual arena, it's really important that we still maintain that, because it helps us to see what the big picture is on a day-to-day kind of basis. And you see, all of this takes time. As a virtual leader, if you are spending time, staying in touch with people, staying in touch with them on a frequent basis, it all takes time. It disrupts your day. But it has to be built in, because if you just get very task orientated, you're now skipping out the relationship bit. You're not optimizing the communication, and therefore, you may get into all sorts of trouble over there. For some people, as soon as the phone call comes and you pick it up, and every time it's task orientated. Hi, Raul, how are you? They don't really care. All is about, where's the results over there. But in the virtual environment, sweating that small talk is really important. It makes a big difference. There was a team that I worked with, a project manager based in the UK, went out to Hungary to see their team and spent a week with them. Now, during that time, they got to know the individuals. This person's favorite football team is this, soccer team is this, this person's married, etc., etc. So when he came back to the UK, every morning, would connect with them and say, how was your weekend? I know you went to see your parents. Is everyone okay? Your little one just started school. How are they? That little small talk helped to build those relationships, helped create that sense of teamwork. So it wasn't very transactional and very team, very task orientated. As a leader, it's really important that we keep people aware of the big picture. So the way I've always analogized this is, think about a jigsaw puzzle, jigsaw puzzle or puzzle, as you may call it. Each and every one of us, we're just simply, one jigsaw piece. Now, let's say we bought a Mona Lisa with 10,000 pieces. Excuse my jigsaw over here. So let's say we've got 10,000 pieces. If I gave you one piece of that puzzle and said, tell me, by looking at this piece, what's the big picture? You couldn't tell me what it looks like. What we need to know is, how does my work fit in with my colleagues? How does my colleagues fit in with my team? How does my team fit in, with the big picture of what we're doing? It's the big picture. There was another project manager in an oil and gas situation. So they had people in India doing lots of sizing calculations and doing very mechanical type operations. The person in the UK, each person would do their piece of this infrastructure for an oil and gas customer. He would show, what the big picture was. He would show it as it was physically being built. That gave them a sense of pride that they were involved, in this particular project over there. So it's really important that, all our front office interfaces, discussions with the client, understanding of the issues within the organization, and that's fed back with the team. Because if we were in the office, you would naturally find this all out. Can I just have 5 minutes of your time? Just come over here. That would happen. Or we'd find out and catch up over lunch. Or we'd catch up, over coffee, etc. But in a virtual setting, when we're separated, it's not naturally going to happen. And then you rise the risk of gossip within the team and people going off, in different types of directions over there. Think about your team and think about disturbance. I mean, I think right now, leaders who've got it, they're very empathetic. They're really understanding that this COVID-19 has had a big impact on a lot of people's lives, as we well know. But right now, people are getting tired of the situation, being separated from other people. And that makes fractions within the team. So you need to scan for those disturbances there. It's kind of natural because of the situation we're in. But that disturbance gets out of hand. That's going to interrupt the dynamics of the team. And also think about the future. When we have new team members join our team, we may not even have the opportunity of meeting them. In the old days, you hired them, they came to the office, spent some time there, and then they may go out into the field or work from home. Well, they may just be in the field or working from home straight away. You need to onboard them. See, traditionally, onboarding is done by the HR department, but we might need to onboard them from our project-specific arena so that people understand what the big picture is and what their contribution is. It also makes them feel, part of that bigger team as well. In the virtual environment, being digitally smart and understanding communications is very important. So, the method of communication becomes interesting, and communication means to connect. But simply put, if you look at it in a graphical format, there are lots of potential issues around communicating in a virtual setting. The first element to think about is when we communicate, we encode a message. If English is the operating language of the organization, then what may happen is people think in their mother tongue, translate it into English, and then it's submitted to the other person. They then receive it. They then decode that message. To make sure the message I sent you is a message I received, you need feedback. Now, if we're together, that feedback becomes instant. But when we're virtual, it's not that instant. There was some research done by a man called Albert Mehrabian. Albert Mehrabian looked at how we communicate in a face-to-face setting. His work was done back in 1967. Now, he said there were three key components around the way we communicate. One was body language. The second was the tone of voice we use. And the third was the actual words we use. Please, I just invite you, what percentage of our communications is body language, or from the research that Albert Mehrabian did? What do you think it is? Just please put it in the chat box. What percentage would body language be? Simon says 80, but 70, 20, 85, 30, 60, 80. So we're getting a bit of a range over there. Thank you for doing that. Actually, what Mehrabian found back in 1967 was that 55% of all communication was body language. Now, I suspect because of technology and communications, etc., it's probably going to be a bit higher over there. So body language is your facial expressions. Even if I'm silent, that score on my face, is part of my body language as well. So 55% was, regardless if it's 55 or it's higher, it's the majority. 38% is the tone of voice that you use, and only 7% are the actual words that you use. Now, the implications of this in a virtual setting is, if you're not using video on a regular basis, you're now operating at a lower end of the scale. You're now operating where you need to use that tone of voice and the actual words you use. Just do a raise of hands if you're using Microsoft Teams. It seems to be the dominant tool out there nowadays. Yeah, Teams is doing very, very well right now, and they've rebranded it, etc. But if you think about Teams, Teams allows you to do email. It allows you to do voice over internet, telephone calls. You can also now switch on your video. You can now do a whiteboard. And whether it's WebEx or Teams or Skype for Business or whatever it might be over there, you see, it allows you to enrich that communication. And in a virtual setting, we need to think about how we use those tools. What we mustn't do is just simply send out those tools and say to people, get on and start using it. We've got to think why we're using that tool. Now, whether it is Teams or SharePoint, it doesn't really matter to me. What we're looking for is some kind of centralized portal. Think about it this way. Let's say we had a filing cabinet in the office. And in that filing cabinet were all the documents pertaining to the project, who's doing what, where, and when. Everyone knew where it was, everyone could come to it and get that information, etc. Now, in a virtual setting, where is that virtual filing cabinet? That's the virtual portal. This is where we should be sharing all our documents via that portal. This is where we should be putting the profiles of each person. My friend, the project director I was telling you about, I told him, you've got this great BA. We don't know what skills and capabilities she has. Why don't we put a profile, a picture up there, skills, and, you often find this feature in the tools, ask me about, what is my areas of specialism? That way we can start sending knowledge to each other. We should be putting up there the progress updates, who's doing what, because we can see the bigger picture. And something simple like shared calendar. So, we've just had Ramadan. Some parts of the world, we need to know that parts of the offices are going to be shut from there. And then as a leader, sharing that sort of weekly update with your teams. Rather than sending out those emails, why don't we send out blogs? So it's there in the central portal. And so today, everybody can read it. It's in the blog. If I want to read it, I can read it. If I don't want to read it, I don't want to read it. But if someone joins in 2 weeks' time, rather than trying to search for that email, it's in that centralized area. Now, if we start with blogs and weekly meetings, why can't we start exchanging knowledge with each other? It becomes that place, that one-stop shop where all information, formal and informal, is being shared with the virtual team. The technology side of things, you could create right now. Now, somebody may ask me, well, what's going to happen here? Are we going to have virtual 3D holograms, X, Y? I don't know. Maybe that's going to happen. But it's simply not a case of whether it is Zoom or Cisco or this, that, or the other. There's lots of great tools. The question I have is, are we using it in the right way? And actually, at a more simplistic level, how we even audited to make sure everyone is singing from the same hymn sheet. Just, I've been doing this a lot with teams all over the world, and I'm so surprised at how many people are still only using a laptop. They haven't got a second screen. Now, I'm fortunate. I have my own home office. I've got 2 massive screens, but some people don't have the space for another screen. What's the impact on the way they get their work done? Does everybody have a camera? We talk about using video, but does everybody have a camera? Does it work? Have we tested it? It's those simple mechanical things there. Do we have proper headsets? You may be using the headset that comes along with your phone. That's not a proper headset. And then people say, oh, virtual doesn't work. That's because the technology isn't holding up over there. So the first part of operating in the virtual environment is just to do a simple audit to make sure everyone has the same sets of tools and the same sort of operating conditions. Then we need to think about the training around the tools. If you just deploy technology, but you don't allow people to understand how to use it effectively, they won't use it. I think the best way of describing this is, think about Microsoft Excel. Out of all the 100 things you could do in Excel, we only end up using 5 or 10% because we're simply not aware. People need to have that training in using that tool. So we need to think about how we train people so they use that tool. We don't need to train people on how to use a telephone because it's kind of built there. But as we start introducing these new technologies, whether it's Teams or WebEx or whatever it might be, if people aren't aware, they're not going to use it in the right way. So, for example, in Teams, are you using whiteboards? Are you able to share and work in a collaborative type of way? Why don't we have a discussion around the comms within our teams? Are we using it in an effective manner rather than simply just deploying it and saying, off you go? So in the virtual environment, we need to have this focus on relationships, communications, and then we get the work done. We're going to be doing more, not less of all of this. And so building those relationships is going to become highly, highly important. Particularly today, everyone is, they're all together. But what is going to happen in the future when new people join the team? How are we going to onboard them? How are we going to build those relationships with each other? You see, I do so many different things, but one of the prime things that I do is I'm a salesperson. And as a salesperson, the key to selling is building a relationship. All we're doing is building a relationship within our team, internal within our organization. And maintaining that relationship becomes very important. And I've been talking for many, many years on the notions of the virtual coffee. It's not sitting here right now, with a coffee and you sitting with a coffee. It's not that. It's you're trying to replicate what we do around the coffee machine. We stand around the coffee machine, we talk with each other, we share knowledge with one another. We need to do that in a virtual setting. Now, one of the things that has really surprised me is how much virtual coffee is going on, how much virtual cake, how much virtual celebration, virtual wine, virtual pub quizzes. I even had virtual Zumba in a very powerful organization? Just raise your hands if you're doing some kind of virtual relationship building. Great. It's an absolute investment, and don't let anyone tell you any different. It's really important that we maintain this. Now, you can see there'll be a bit of a lull. People will say, oh, I'm fed up of virtual pub quiz and this, that, and the other. Find something else to replace it, because building those relationships are incredibly important for our team. There's some other things I think we need to think about, post COVID-19. And one of them is sharing knowledge with each other. You see, here I am right now in my home, operating in my office. I might be Raoul on his own. I might be Raoul, part of a 200,000 person organization. How do we know? The point there is, how do I get access to the knowledge that exists within the organization? So regardless of where I am, how do I tap in to all the knowledge that exists? And you see, there's two forms of knowledge that are important. One is called explicit knowledge, and one is called tacit knowledge. Explicit knowledge is a knowledge that you can write down and codify, and you can put it into a book or a PDF and send it to somebody else. So you can transfer that knowledge. The more interesting knowledge becomes the tacit knowledge. Tacit knowledge are the how-tos. Tacit knowledge is tying your shoelaces. You all know how to tie your shoelaces, but if you were to try to write it on a flip chart, it'd be very difficult to describe it in that area there. That's because it's in here. So we need opportunity to share tacit knowledge with each other. And the way organizations are doing this is by sharing videos. It's so difficult for me to describe. Let me share a video with you. Why don't we do a lunch and learn with each other? Why don't we say, okay, within our team, Raoul, on the Friday, just give us the best practices on doing A, B, and C, the project that you were working on, recently. That's where we start sharing that knowledge to the wider domain within our team. And we need to think about tacit knowledge exchanges, in a virtual type of setting. And as a leader, whether you are together or whether you're virtual, you still need to motivate the team. So motivation becomes very important. We're all motivated by different things. We get that. But when you take money off the table, how are people motivated? So this was some research that was done by Hackman and Oldham. And they looked at, what they found was there are 5 key factors when it comes to motivating individuals. And I think we can use this in a virtual setting. The first one is people are motivated when you use their set of skills. Clearly, the reason why I'm doing this is because I did my MBA and I wanted to, carry on exchanging my knowledge. But you see, in the virtual setting, how do we know what skill sets people have? The people who are furloughed, that they may well have done additional training, learn new languages, programming languages, etc. How will we know what they've developed? And how will the team know? What existing knowledge they've developed in the meantime over there. So we need to have some arena of sharing those skills with other people. Then we need to have an understanding of the task identity. Task identity is what's the big picture? We need to make sure that people understand it's not about the isolated pieces of work we're doing, it's the big picture and how they're all connected with each other. But we also need to understand the task significance. When we do a piece of work and we get good reviews from our customers, we need to share it with everybody. Equally, if we haven't done a great job, we need the lessons learned to be done there. But for me, I think 2 key factors about motivation in a virtual setting are autonomy and feedback. Autonomy is giving people the freedom to do the work they need to do it. It's not about telling them the micromanagement. We're smart people. We don't want to be micromanaged. But the reason why leaders start micromanaging in a virtual setting is lack of trust. And when the trust doesn't exist, they start micromanaging. When they micromanage, they're not doing autonomy. When they're not doing autonomy, you're demotivating the team. And individuals will also need feedback. You see, feedback is important and an integral part of performance management. And this is still going to be required, even if we're separated. People need that feedback. And one of the most powerful forms of feedback is that informal feedback. When you see it, say it. Either good or bad, we need to give it, and we need to do it on a regular basis. And the point I'm trying to raise here again is giving people feedback. Whether you write it down or you call them, it all takes time. But it's all time that's properly invested, helps our team to be successful over there. So we still have to motivate people even when we're separated. We have to motivate ourselves. We also have to motivate our team. And I wanted to show you this phenomena by Bruce Tuckman. Just raise your hands if you come across Tuckman's forming, storming, norming, performing model. It's very well known. For those of you who haven't come across it, I'll just briefly describe this. Let's imagine there's 4 of us. We're working together on a project. And let's all come to London. And on Monday, we'll start working together. Okay, so there's 4 people that have worked together before. Now, as we start working together, what happens is our performance starts falling and eventually gets to some kind of minima, and then it starts rising, and then it gets to a steady state. Now, Bruce Tuckman, said, I recognize this. This is called the forming, the storming, the norming, the performing. Forming is we're getting to learn about each other. We're all different. We all have diversity over there. How do we leverage that? Storming is as we're learning about each other, our nuances, our pluses, our minuses, our strengths and weaknesses, our performance falls, but the good thing is we're building those relationships. Then they'll get to some minima, and then we start normalizing. So rather than playing to each other's negatives, we start playing to each other's positives. We're normalizing the behavior, and then we start performing. Okay, so this sort of phenomena people have seen an awful lot. But what I've always wanted to find the answer to and to consider is, what happens if you were to compare a co-located team with a virtual team? See, the red line represents that co-located team. We all went to London to get this project done. Now, if there's 4 people, one in New York, one in Sao Paulo, wherever, we're virtual, I suspect that the virtual same process, it would still have this dip, and then it would have its rise, and then it might come up to wherever it might be. Now, the reason why I have it lower is because I don't think virtual is the same as face-to-face in today's context, because we're so conditioned to being in together. But beyond that, the point I really want to raise here is that minimum point in the virtual setting takes longer. I may not have illustrated it so nicely over here, but it's going to take longer to form. And that creates a risk from a leader's point of view. If we want to suppress it, if we want that dip to happen earlier, then the best way of doing that is by investing in 3 things. 1, build and maintain those relationships. Okay. Secondly, communicate to collaborate. So communicate in order to collaborate. So there's no point just communicating on its own. You're communicating towards collaborating. And the third element is establish those ground rules. Those ground rules will help the team to operate effectively. And those ground rules, help us to get the end results. Good high-performing teams, they have ground rules. You can't make them explicit. You need to make them, you can't make them implicit. You need to make them explicit. If you go to any country, when you land and you get into customs, they tell you exactly what to do. Fill in this form, stand over here. These are the ground rules of how we want you to operate. We need the same in our virtual teams. Because if I was working for Mary in London in the same company, then I worked for John in New York the next day, Mary and John may have different sets of ground rules. What should those ground rules be? Whatever helps your team to be successful, create those ground rules. Whether it's about how we communicate, how we exchange knowledge, how we onboard people, whatever helps our team to be successful, we need to put those ground rules in place. The thing I want to leave you on is really my observation around COVID-19 and virtual working. A lot of people have thought, I've worked this virtual thing out easily. I know how to use Zoom meetings and set myself up at home. Look at me as a virtual leader. It's just the tip of the iceberg, quite literally over here. We're going to be doing more, not less of this. The leader who has that, is able to build and maintain those relationships, employs that empathetic communication in order to collaborate, is then able to get the results done. If, however, we think it's all about the results and we don't invest below the waterline, we're going to be in trouble. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. I wish we had the time to take questions, etc. But it's been an absolute pleasure working with you. And, first of all, I want to say to everybody, best wishes. We're all in this situation right now. It's kind of a unifying thing for a lot of us, but we still need to be safe. And just think about virtual working, not just COVID, but afterwards as well. How is it going to change the way we work? Are we going to be happy and comfortable operating in this type of format? What do we need to do to change for that virtual world? Because remember, for that next generation that comes in, it's not going to be change, it's going to be the new reality. And that's where I say we're going to drop the word virtually, and it's just going to be leadership that we do. Stay well, ladies and gentlemen. It's been an absolute pleasure. I wish you all well. And from Bedford in the UK, take care. Take care, everybody. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.